And again, if we don't get through each of these sections tonight, that's fine if there's some rigorous debate on a particular topic. But I don't predict too many changes. But Dylan, do you just want to explain the process?
Sure. So we do have all the recommendations from this commission. A good chunk of them do have some draft language, but nothing that we have ready to submit just yet. So what I anticipate happening is as we get through that, I will then present all of the red lines. The commission will then go through what works, what doesn't work, how you want it to be redrafted. And then there'll be another meeting after that where I present another final set of language. There'll be two goals at that meeting. One would be to approve the final set of language, and then secondarily, how they'd be grouped for ballot questions. That takes a little bit of work. You do end up organizing some things in a bit of an odd manner. One of them that comes to mind is, shall the charter be updated to reflect and defer to state law as necessary? And there may be like a section from Article 10, another one from Article 7, another one from Article 4, that really all we're doing is saying we're striking language that is somehow contradictory to state law. So rather than putting a ballot question that's like a really detail-oriented question about how you calculate tax rates or something like that, it's just being described as matching state law. So hopefully we'll be able to do those two things at the same meeting, and then the council will be asked to do the same. They get presented to the council in the form of draft resolutions, because they do need to be passed by the council as a resolution before it's set off to the Secretary of State's office for confirmation on the language for a ballot. I think after budget season, there'll be a little bit more attention and bandwidth throughout the administration and with council members. I do like to try to check in with council members on this sort of language from time to time, try to understand if there's something that I need to be aware of and needs to be presented to the commission. And right now, bandwidth has been a pretty extreme challenge.
And in regards to meetings, so again, October, November, the way we had discussed how that would work, if there's no need to meet, then to comply with the charter that we have to meet at least monthly, a meeting would be posted with no actual business on it, correct?
Yep. And then you'd be in compliance with the charter, but there wouldn't be a need to actually hold the meeting because there'd be no content to be discussed. So it would just fail for lack of quorum, and then we would schedule another one if we got there. It's a little bit of an odd artifice, but there is a mandatory requirement for monthly meetings.
Are there any questions regarding that?
Could one of the groups, when in the ballot grouping, just be for like editorial
Yes.
changes, spelling and things of that nature?
Yes.
Group them, it'd be just a simple, verbiage or whatever. Is that possible?
Yes, we like
Yes.
to refer to them as Scrivener's errors, and we can correct all of them. I actually don't, off the top of my head, I know we debated it at one point in time, but you could add a provision to the charter which allows Scrivener's errors to be fixed by the council on a sort of ongoing basis as opposed to going all the way back to the ballot. I have something drafted to that effect. I know I did it for Pawtucket. I don't think it was put in the charter off the top of my head. But it was actually developed, the concept was developed with the previous charter commission. I don't know whether or not it made it in.
I'm just spitballing, but we could always add that in to the section where the ordinances need to be updated every 10 years. But just a thought.
The way we structured it before is the change has to have absolutely no legal impact. And so the council would approve the change by resolution, and a portion of the resolution would be an affirmative finding that the change doesn't cause a legal impact in the charter. If it causes a legal impact, it needs to be a ballot question. But if I forget an apostrophe or, if something's a semicolon for seemingly no reason, we can fix it.
Okay. So with that, I guess we can dive into Articles 6, 7, and 8 is Departments of Public Works, Police, and Fire. I don't have any recommendations for these. I'd personally rather not touch them as just establishing the departments and the powers therein. I would hope we don't want to mess with our police and fire departments or our public works departments, but that's up to you guys.
Through the chair, if I might ask the solicitor, is there a particular legal reason, Dylan, that the 6-1 says there shall be a Department of Public Works, the head of which shall be the Director of Public Works, who shall be or be appointed by the mayor? Is there a reason why in this particular department they're saying that the mayor could hold that position as well as the mayor? It's kind of a big department for.
So, usually there's an automatic fallback that the mayor assumes the role as the chief of police or the chief of the fire department because there needs to be a head of public safety. My off-the-cuff insight into why that language is there is that wouldn't necessarily be clear for DPW, but there may be a very real need for have a DPW director to make some sort of decision on a more emergency basis. But that is me just kind of contextually guessing.
Yeah, Dylan, if I remember correctly, I think the logic behind that was because the mayor is the appointing authority. If there is if there's an interim period where there is no director of public works, that the mayor can assume that ability. Normally, there would be sort of interim director, a deputy that would get appointed from underneath, but technically the mayor wouldn't have to appoint someone. I think that was the logic behind it. But I don't remember exactly.
That sounds,
Because he technically doesn't have to hire a DPW director because that is an at-will position.
Providence went without a department director somewhat infamously for about a decade, so it does happen. That would make sense to me.
But through the chair again, wouldn't it be more beneficial to the people if the mayor did something like was done in the city clerk's office, for instance, where there was an acting city clerk who had experience in that? We could, and I'm not talking about our particular mayor. I'm not even talking about anybody that I could think of in the future. But what if a mayor gets in there with no qualifications for public works and we're allowing he or she to run that department as opposed to appointing somebody from within the department or somebody with knowledge temporarily until that mayor finds somebody that would be more in tune to holding that position than a political, than somebody who holds an office such as mayor.
I think that's the exact sort of policy question that this commission, is empowered to kind of discuss and hold a vote on.
Okay, well, I'm putting it on the floor. Anybody wants to have any ideas for me?
Which one are you, I'm sorry, through the chair, exactly which one are you looking at, Bruce? Okay, I just want to be reading the right one.
Through the chair, if I may. I would make a motion that the portion that says where it says, there shall be a Department of Public Works, the head of which shall be the Director of Public Works, who shall be, request, my motion is to strike that, and say, or be, and say appointed by the mayor, and who shall be subject to removal by the mayor. I would make that motion.
Well, hold on. Let's still discuss this. We have a practical reason too. So you look at the Department of Public Works right now, and just like every other department, you have the department head is always non-union. Division heads in the city are almost always union. You have situations where that division head can become a de facto department head, but in the interim period, you can't have a division head, let's say the chief engineer right now. I forget what the management union is, but having them become a department head, that would be, I think that might actually be a state law issue. But, so there is a period of time that the mayor would have to actually appoint a DPW director. And you have to go through, if the mayor is doing this correctly, it would have to go through some sort of hiring process. So in that time, someone needs to represent Public Works Department as a director. Now, if it's not the mayor, you have their director of administration. I know the city went a while without an HR director. It was the same thing. Director of administration served as the HR director. So I would caution changing that language.
But don't we have the situation, or didn't we have the situation in city clerk's office where there was, the title was acting city clerk, correct, Ms. Perry? Acting city clerk, so it'd be acting public works director. I'm just worried, Mark, that there's, again, without naming names or without even envisioning anybody who's the mayor, that it's somebody, the mayor decides, okay, whether he or she is qualified or not. The public works director either was fired, was quit, gone, retired, whatever. I'm going to act as a public works director and do stuff that may not be conducive to working with people or helping the people of the city of East Providence. We take that language out, the mayor still can appoint, but the mayor would not be the mayor and the public works director at the same time, which public works director, if I'm not mistaken, always was the largest department in the city. I think it still is, if not the largest, one of the largest. And I think it's maybe too much work for somebody to put it on themselves for whatever reason they have. And I don't think it's beneficial to the people of the city. And that's why I make.
Through the chair, may I ask the city solicitor a question? In your, and I'm going to ask you to put on your thinking cap, with your experience with other charters, can you tell us how other cities have approached this? Because it makes sense. So what is there state law that backs up the way it was written currently? Or is there a different way that cities are approaching it now that we should know about?
I'm not aware of any particular pattern or approach that other municipalities have taken. There are state laws that require actions by the DPW director, but that's largely related to sort of the interaction between the municipality and RIDOT. So there's things related to easements, maintenance, not even just of the roads, but of like the vegetation on the sides of roads, which is actually a component of the city's argument regarding streetlights. I don't know that there was any state law that drove the language that was there, but I can't off the top of my head definitively say, no, there's none. Of course, whatever this commission would propose as final language before it got to the ballot, we would check to confirm whether or not there's anything in state law that was at issue. But off the top of my head, I don't know that whether it was the language as drafted or as proposed. I don't think it would have any impact relative to state law or would, in either case, be all that variant from the way other charters handle it.
Could this have been a typo? I know there have been some in the charter, but could this have been a typo where it would say, Director of Public Works who shall be appointed by the mayor?
Yeah, it could very well. I mean, there's a,
All the department heads use the same language.
does it?
Yeah.
Each of them has that?
I think.
Through the chair. And how about the situation, Mark, or everyone, where the city council cannot question the department heads? They have to go directly to the mayor. Now, the mayor is the department head in this case, if he appoints himself or as the public works director. And they question the mayor on something in public works. Well, I'm the public works director. You have to go through the mayor. I think it's confusing. I think I agree with Mrs. Perry. I don't think it intended to be that way because there is a bit of a conflict.
Well, I'm just gonna put it there that I understand where you're coming from, but it's an at-will position. And I believe the intent is when you would elect the mayor, you also give that mayor the power, whether you believe personally that the mayor is qualified or not. Clearly, majority of the electorate did, to appoint their department heads, and it's an at-will position. The mayor can choose whether or not to fill the position. And if it's left vacant, someone on a piece of paper still has to be listed as the director. So de facto, that ends up being the mayor, whether we put it in the charter or not.
It was a chair. Should I second this motion so we can have a discussion? Just to get it in order. So I'll second Mr. Rogers' motion for the purpose of discussion. And with Commissioner Perry's question regarding the typo, the same language is in the Director of Finance. So I think it's in there on purpose. And my question to the solicitor is, and I think it's a moot question. I don't think qualifications run into this. The mayor doesn't have to be an engineer. He's the boss, so he can, run that ship until he appoints a new captain. So
That's, yeah, I think fundamentally, qualifications are determined in the ballot box, right? And then thereafter, we find out how qualified people are or are not. But they're deemed qualified by the people at the outset of a term. That's generally the legal concept behind not limiting eligibility for office.
Through the chair. To the solicitor again, a legal question on this. And I had this come up in my administration, which was a different form of government, where a solicitor was acting as the city manager. And they gave an argument that they should draw both salaries. Does this lead us to maybe a legal, and again, no people in mind, but a mayor who may want to do it, get extra money? Does that give a legal argument with this wording for he or she to get mayor's pay and acting public works pay at the time that they are serving as public works director?
So I would say they could make that claim, but I don't believe they would be entitled to it. And I would also additionally say that the council would have final say over that because they would control the budget. So if someone started to try to take an additional paycheck, the council could effectively defund the position. Now, you can't defund to terminate somebody. That's a little bit different. There's due process to a termination, but you're not terminating anybody. You would really be in a position that you're stopping someone from taking 2 paychecks for a full-time job. There's actually a lot of emerging law on this front because of work from home, believe it or not. There's a lot of people that have accepted more than one 40-hour per week full-time position. And when it comes out, it's a cause for termination, and whether or not you can claw back salary is an emerging question in employment law.
Through the chair. Just a question. I know the solicitor had said that another city has had the mayor as the department head for years. But is there a finite time as, by de facto, the mayor would be, based on what's on it stated, would be the de facto director for that time until something's appointed? Right? Is there a finite time where they would have to have that, or would it be able to? Would the mayor be able to remain in that position by choice with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Through the chair, question for the solicitor. So if that's the case, then can the Charter Commission discuss putting in, this can only be for a certain amount of time and an appointment has to be made? Or can we, legally, can we put something like that to protect the city and also make sure that we're not dealing with, in the future, any issues that may come back to bite us later?
Chairman, I don't see, we're wasting a lot of time. I don't see what the problem is with this language. Steve quit not that long ago, correct? Well, the mayor, we already had a strong mayor. He hired the person that we have now. The language does work, so I don't know what the problem is. We had that experience already. The Steve Corder, right? Is that his last name? Steve left and went to Bristol. And normally those folks are professional. They give you an advance notice that they're leaving, gives the mayor enough time to hire someone to do the job. So I don't know where we're spending a lot of time on this.
Mr. Chairman?
I think the language, excuse me, I still get the floor. So I think there's no need to change the language. Sometimes the more that we change language, the worse it gets. I think it works. So therefore, I don't, if there is a motion, say I'll be voting against this, because there's no need to change that, the language. Or to insert new language.
Yeah, John, I think you summed it up. I think sometimes we get a little too into the weeds on this. We can talk about hypotheticals all day long. And we can talk about Providence, we can talk about whatever it is, but in terms of, in the charter, we're listing finance, police, fire, public works. These are departments that are not, you cannot de facto have someone that the mayor is not, realistically, let's look at this tangibly. The mayor is not going to just make themselves public works director. And even if hypothetically you get the worst mayor ever that is going to make themselves public works director, because of the way the city's set up, we have a union engineer. We still have a planning department with a director of planning. We have an infrastructure set up. So while there's no, I'm not faulting our current DPW director. I know he has a full plate. It's the public works department is not going to fall apart overnight in that case, but I believe the language is intended as an interim for a vacancy, not as a way for a future mayor to have a power grab. So I think it would be beneficial for us to speed things along a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, could you just allow the city solicitor to answer my question, though, before Commissioner Farrier was allowed to interject? I still haven't gotten an answer from the solicitor to my question.
What was the question?
Do you remember the question, or do you need me to repeat it?
Remember nodding, so I have.
Well, I'm sorry, but I don't think they heard you on TV, the nod either. I didn't hear the nod. I apologize.
I don't remember the.
I have a tendency to look at people that are speaking.
No, I remember nodding in the sense that I believe my answer is going to be an affirmative, but I don't remember exactly what the question was.
The question was that if this charter commission wanted to add language to make sure that we don't become another Providence and have, as Mr. Sulo stated, a never-ending person, if we get a future mayor that allows that, could we put some type of language in legally?
You could.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair. I just want, whoever said this, I just want to throw this out there that they said that they don't have to be an engineer to be a public works director. 6-2, the director of public works shall have a degree in engineering from an approved college or university. So I see this as even a further problem if we get a mayor who wants to play around.
Pretty clear. It tells you that the director shall be an engineer. So I don't understand what the problem is. If you hire someone to be a director, it's pretty clear on the language.
It's through the chair, Mr. Farrier. It's not the director that the mayor hires. It's if the mayor decides he or she is going to be the acting director of public works. He's not an engineer, and it, it may or may not happen. But this is allowing it to happen with somebody who wants to circumvent the system and fix all the roads when they don't know what they're doing.
Through the chair.
We'd still be in charge.
To the chair, doesn't 6-2, maybe 6-2 was put in to prevent 6-1, that situation we're dealing with or talking about from happening? Because it automatically adds credentials, and automatically says, again, shall have had at least 3 years engineering experience. That automatically takes somebody off the director.
Yeah,
Do that.
the
Qualifications. That's
6-1,
fail-safe.
the language that's in 6-1 that says the mayor can, it's in place of a vacancy. The mayor de facto stands in as the director. Why? Because the mayor appoints the director. The power of the director comes from the mayor. Why? Because the mayor's power comes from the people. You're making it a more democratic process. It's less bureaucratic. That's not to say that the DPW director doesn't have to be qualified. It says right here in the language. The mayor is not, it's not saying that the mayor has to be an engineer to be the DPW director. The placeholder piece of language. The mayor is still supposed to appoint a DPW director. I would caution putting in language saying they have to appoint a DPW director within a certain amount of time. Putting in overly constraining language for situations that we as a charter commission cannot foresee usually comes back to bite you in the future for a future city council or an administration. That's just my personal experience. But
Through the chair. Mr. Solicitor, do you see any conflict in the wording between section 6-1 and section 6-2 if in fact there is not a public works director and the mayor appoints he or she as the acting, or not even acting, as the public works director?
I think your question included the concept of someone acting in the position. And I think that is the workaround that would be used in that scenario, that they are not the actual director, that they are the acting director. That may also be relevant within the context of your earlier question regarding pulling two salaries. They are not, in fact, the director. They're acting in that position. In this scenario, from a legal perspective, either language direction seems to work. I don't know that there's a large change in what would occur if that language was or was not there. I do think it's interesting that the language exists for some department heads, but not others. But I've been comparing those sections as we've been talking, and I can't figure out a reason why it's for some departments and not others. It just strikes me as an idiosyncratic language choice.
Through the chair. Even if we delete that language, if the DPW director resigns tomorrow, the mayor's still going to be in charge of that department, with or without the language being specific.
That's correct.
So I don't see what we would gain by deleting it.
Mr. Chair, I think, Bruce, you're stuck on, when you were back in the day, when you were on the council, when you were the mayor, you had the solicitor, we all know, God rest his soul. You had a vacancy on the city manager. He became the city manager because it was a higher pay, but somebody allowed him to do that. It's either the council, he didn't have the power to say, well, going forward, I'm going to be the city manager. Because he was the solicitor. And you're right, I remember it exactly like it was today. He became the manager because there was more money. Well, that was then. Now, if I'm going to ask who allowed him to take that job as a manager, as a city manager, somebody did. Had to be the council. Okay? So here, this language, I think it works, has worked forever. And we had the experience when Steve left, he went to work in Bristol. The mayor hired someone else to do the job, and obviously there's no problem. We can go through this language here, and every time we're talking about an article, there's always room for change. And I think we got to be careful when we're talking about changing language. I personally was pretty involved in changing bylaws and local unions that I represented. And, and we do come with the attitude to change the world. And I think we got to be careful because sometimes we do more damage than good changing language. I don't think there's a problem with this language. I think it works. And I think if it was a problem, the mayor would come forward and say, I do have a problem on, on that particular department. I don't think it is. I don't think there's a problem with the language. It's pretty clear. So, there's a motion on the second for the purpose of discussion. I think we had enough discussion on this. Move the question, Mr. Chairman.
Is there any further discussion on the item?
You have to move the question. You move the question, you have to go forward with the vote. Robert's Rules of Order. That's the solicitor.
You moved the question, so there's a request for a roll call vote on the floor.
Because we're going to continue the discussion. Unless you withdraw your motion, realizing there's no need to insert new language or delete the language.
You just want to call the roll.
Roll call vote.
Excuse me, the clerk has asked for the motion to be read. You don't understand the motion? Or you do? All right, well, can the solicitor read it?
Yes, so as I understand the motion, it's to strike the clause that reads who shall be within 6-1. So it should read who shall be appointed by the mayor. Oh, it's actually striking or be. Who shall be appointed by the mayor.
You get that? Okay.
Nay.
Mr. Lewis,
Nay.
Mrs. Perry votes nay. Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
Ms. Silva,
Nay.
Mr. Sulo,
Nay.
Mr. Tavares,
Nay.
Mr. Vinatiero,
Nay.
Chairman Furtado,
Nay.
motion defeated.
So moving on to Department of Police. Do we have any issues with the police department?
I've just got a question about consistency. And I noticed that in order to be the chief of police, you need experience above the rank of sergeant. But to be the fire chief, you need experience equal to or above the rank of captain. Why aren't we consistent with the two departments? Is there a reason? Is it contractual? I don't know.
I would suspect it was a political reason at some point in time, but I don't know. That's pure conjecture. I don't see any reason why there would have to be any limitation on that front at all.
I just wonder why it wasn't consistent. They're both paramilitary organizations, and one you've got to be a captain, and the other one you're not even an officer, you're a sergeant. So,
Your question about the contract is also a good one.
So it could be
That's playing
contractual.
into it, Yeah.
thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can you just tell me, because I'm having trouble finding it, where in the charter it states that the mayor is the ex officio? Because I noticed, as Mr. Vinatiero pointed out, there's some inconsistencies that it's not always written in different places. And I just was wondering where it's stated in here so we know to refer back to that.
Ex officio in regards to what specific?
In the charter, where does it state when they changed the mayoral form of government, where in the charter did they put that the mayor is ex officio? When there's a department change or an issue, like if someone's left, where is it stated in the charter? Is that ordinance? Is that charter? Is that just automatic?
Off the top of my head, I would assume it's in Article 3, under his powers to appoint department heads.
The mayor has basically the penultimate duty. There is no duty that must be performed by the administration that cannot be performed by the mayor because the mayor is responsible for it. So it would default up the chain of command essentially to the mayor in any absence.
Okay, and I understand that, and I thought that that's how it was. But my question for asking this is for legally, if we're like cleaning up the charter and making sure that everything that was switched over from city manager form of government to mayoral form of government, shouldn't it state in the charter that? So then this way, like Mr. Rogers had a question about, there wouldn't be a question and there would be a consistency. So even when you're looking at other sections of the charter and it doesn't say, oh, it goes to the mayor's ex officio, well, we know that it goes to such and such. And I can't find it. And I may be overlooking it. That's why I'm asking for it. But I don't understand. That I would think would have been language just that would have been put in there when we did a mayoral form of government, just to let everybody know, because in case they were sleeping during civics class, that's an important piece of, it's an important piece of information. And we have to assume that when people are reading this, that they might not know that. And to protect the charter, to protect our mayor, to protect our language, and the fact that everything's not consistent, every department head, it doesn't state that, we should know somewhere in here that the mayor's ex officio, and if this happens, without question, this is what it is, and you can go to X, Y, Z of the charter, and you'll read it there, and everybody will know that legally it's binding, and that's how we expect it. And I'm just looking for that.
So I would read it into section 3.4, which states the mayor shall be chief executive administrative officer of the city and shall be responsible for the administration and management of all offices, departments, and agencies, except as may otherwise be provided by this charter. So what that clause is saying is the mayor has the power to perform every single duty within the city unless the charter explicitly says the mayor does not. So that is the clause that I would cite if that fact pattern came to rise.
That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, what are we now?
So we're on Department of Police. Again, any issues? Department of Fire?
Hi, Mr. Chairman, I was just referring to what Mr. Vanatero said, and I don't know if that's contractual part of the contract.
I think it is.
You know,
I
because
can't recall
agree
off the
with you.
top
I
of my
mean,
head.
if you're a sergeant, you can move up to chief in the police department. Why can't you? And I don't know. I mean, is that part of the contract? I have no clue. I don't know. You know. But to
Yeah.
me, it would make sense is to move up, having, be equal as the police department, sergeant. But I have no idea if that's contractual or not, so.
Mr.
Maybe,
Chairman?
but I'm sure if there was a problem in the past, they would be complaining to the mayor or to the city manager at one point. So maybe if they have not, maybe there is no problem. And I don't think we want to create a problem.
I have a question, and maybe Mr. Farrier can help with this one because of his experience with contractual. When you're doing a contractual, wouldn't you have to go by what the charter states? So if the charter was corrected and allowed, wouldn't there have to be a contractual correction?
Yes, but it may not apply to the current contract because you have a vested right within a contract at a certain point in time. So it's a very interesting legal question because if the people change, any charter changes, the people making a change. If the people change who does or does not qualify for an office, but you have a contract that says something otherwise that had already been enacted earlier, which of those two provisions would control? It's a good question. I would suggest that once the charter is changed from that point going forward, it's crystal clear. You could never enact a contract that didn't comply with the charter, but for the interim time period, I think that's the sort of stuff that you litigate.
I think that's a very good point that Mr. Vinatero brought up. And to say, even you yourself saying that it was probably a political reason back in the day that it was made, it doesn't mean that we should leave it that political reason from this point forward. And I think to say it's contractual, well, I would think that you're debating it because it's in the charter. So, I mean, I don't think.
Their argument would be, this is what the charter says. You got to be a captain before you're promoted to chief. And the police department is, you can move up to chief if you're a sergeant. Okay. Now, if they have on a contract, now, if I'm talking about this contractual, I don't think that could be contractual on the police department, because I think the local would be fighting to have the same language that states on the charter with the police department. So I think we're making a lot out of, maybe there's no problem on the fire department.
I
That's
think if we were to change it, we
issue.
would,
I don't know.
I'm sorry, through the chair. I think if we were to change it, we could create a problem. Yes.
Well, we also have ordinances that apply to both police and fire that I think also state qualifications that I think are above that. So that are actually tied to the contracts, because I believe every time we negotiate contracts, if there's a specific change that conflicts with the ordinances, we end up updating the ordinance.
The interplay between the contracts and ordinances often have to deal with pension standards. And there's some state law that can impact that. So oftentimes as a part of approving a CBA, there may be a provision that requires an ordinance change. But both of those things would go through the council. So there's a full legislative process that it would address it head on.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to go back to the last charter commission that we had. Really, some of the changes that we worked on, most of the changes that we worked on, it was changing language from city manager to the mayor. And I think Mr. Vanatero made a lot of sense. But sometimes the language is here for a reason. We can go to this language and find changes from here to Chicago. But there's reasons why the language is here on the charter. Is that's proven in the past that it has worked for the city. And I think we got to be very careful and changing some of the language because we're going by article, and I believe we should be very careful and change it in certain new language or the leading language because it has worked for the last, I don't know how many years. I think we got to be careful. And the more we change language, and I personally worked on changing constitutions of my own organization with the IBW, contract language, bylaw language, and sometimes the more. I was one of these guys back in the day when my elections used to be at the high school in 78 and 80s. And Mr. Vanatera was I don't think you were the superintendent, but you were because you used to rent the hall. And I was one of those that I want to change the world in language until finally I learned, listen, the language is the reason. But it took me a lot of time to learn. So you got to be careful because sometimes changing a lot of language, it just doesn't do the trick. I am talking about contractual language, negotiation. Well, the charter doesn't change. It's like bylaws. We come in with the attitude that we want to change the world. Believe it or not, when we had the last charter commission, I came in with that attitude. But I backed off very easy because I was learning a little bit about the charter and changes that were important. But we did focus, believe it or not, it was more than the language. If the city manager versus, the strong mayor, obviously, and some of the changes that we made. So when you look, even when we came here this time, there is not a lot of language to change. And I try to tell you early on, it's a lot easier than we think. Because once this is done, what else do we have? Okay. That's it.
Yeah.
So when I said early on, you could have 2 meetings and 3 months be done, let me tell you something, I wasn't wrong. And if once this is done, ready to submit to the council, you will see and count how many meetings that we have. So, just saying that we do have to be very careful with changing. If it works, don't touch it.
Yeah, John, I agree with that. And for all I know, the ordinance has parity right now. So I would
Yeah.
say we don't know what the contractual language is. The ordinance has to match within its confines what is in the contract. So, and this again sets the bar. It doesn't it says at sergeant or above. So the ordinance can always be higher. So I think when you come up to standards, you can put minimum qualifications in the charter, but it's easier to always raise that by ordinance. So that's my recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, just a process question. Are we going to vote on each article to move on to the next one or just move on?
I unless there are particular changes that we want to make, I think it's
Just move
more
on?
efficient to just move through the whole thing.
Okay.
And Mr. Solicitor, unless you have a problem with that.
Okay, so we have no problem, which one, Mr. Chairman, with the
Fire department, police department.
fire?
So moving on to personnel, 9-1, again, we have an entire process with the administration goes through. That's pretty standard hearing board set up for that. Same thing. I personally don't want to touch that.
No, but I do have a question to raise. There's no mention of the director.
That's in the ordinance.
Do we need to add it?
Personally, if it's already in the ordinance, I don't think we need to add it into the charter. But
Okay.
I will say for 9-3, employee protection, I have major First Amendment concerns with 9-3-1, that someone holding a position in the administrative service essentially can't express a political opinion other than vote. They can't they can't, it says here, you can't contribute campaign funds to a candidate. I mean, that, I think as a city, we ignore this section of the charter because it's a blatant First Amendment violation.
That does read to me as something that curtails First Amendment rights. To strip someone of the ability to have political speech is inappropriate. I would not read this as being able to prevent them. I'm imagining a fact pattern. Someone makes a donation. It is brought to people's attention that that's a violation of the charter. What would the penalty be? The penalty would be presumably some sort of employment penalty, some sort of discharge, suspension, et cetera. If that were to occur, I mean, that is unbelievably appealable wrongful termination, right? I mean, it's roughly equivalent to cutting them a check. There's no way that any negative employment action could be taken as a result of someone politically speaking.
Yeah, I mean, can use the state as an example. If you're a state employee, yeah, you can't engage in political business during work hours, but afterwards, whatever you want to do. Personally, as a federal employee, I'm bound by the Hatch Act, and I can't do certain things, donate to an actual political party, but that's a federal exception. But I can donate to a political candidate. I can take part in a political campaign. I mean, those are First Amendment rights. So I have a major problem with this section. I personally would like to eliminate 9-3 altogether.
Mr. Chairman, so I guess you just proved that we really do have to look at language. Even though a minute ago you said that we can't change, you shouldn't be changing everything. I know what you meant. I'm just saying that this is a good example of that.
Are you looking for a motion, Mr. Chairman? I'll move that we eliminate section 9-3.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
That was the full motion to strike the entirety of section 9-3. All right, so all of this, I will bring back that language as drafted, and then we'll have one final vote on that, and that will include where it's organized in terms of ballot questions, et cetera, just to touch base on how that will work.
And Manny, for Article 10, gonna have to recuse myself again.
Does anyone have any suggestions for amendments on Article 10?
If I may take the microphone, through the chair. I recommend that we present to the city council for the purpose of presenting it to the general public, changing the terms for the school committee to 4 years as opposed to 2 years. And at the same time, I asked the city solicitor a question, is there a state law that this charter is not in conflict with, but this charter is overriding a state law that says school committee should hold 4-year terms? Do you know of that?
I don't believe so. I believe that was actually a charter amendment that was passed at one point in time, but it requires ratification by the General Assembly. It did not receive ratification. It passed one chamber, but not the other. We ended up having a Supreme Court decision on the length of terms within the city as a result of that. It was a decision that was related to both the council and the school committee. I'm working from memory here. I do believe that the reason why we currently only have the 2 years as the school committee and the 4 years as the council is because that was related to the Supreme Court's controlling opinion on that front. But I am not aware of anything that would prevent a school committee from having a 4-year term.
A motion has been made. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion.
Discussion.
Yes, Mr. Tavares.
If you're going to move it to 4 years, school committee, wouldn't you have to line it up with the city council so that you would have an election every 2 years, one for school committee and one for city council?
Okay,
And they all should be on the same block.
could. However, you've segued into my suggestion. And that would be, in our last election in East Providence, we had every elected official up for reelection at the same time. Nightmare scenario, we could have had everyone brand new and no one with any institutional knowledge or institutional history assuming office. Some people might think that's a good thing, but, you know, I think institutional knowledge is important. I would like to offer a friendly amendment to Mr. Rogers' motion that the school committee have a 4-year term, but that the terms be staggered as they used to be. If you recall, we used to have school committee 4-year terms, 2 and 3. That way, regardless of the outcome of an election, there was always someone who had institutional history,
For continuity.
institutional knowledge, continuity. Yes. And if the motion, if Mr. Rogers accepts the amendment to the motion, we've already got 2-year terms. So at that next election, and this would be something that the solicitor's office would have to write up,
Up first.
either 2 people would be elected for a
4 year.
2-year term and 3 people for a 4-year, or vice versa. And then it would just flow from then on. And we'd have that staggered term.
I recall, we used to do that before. Yeah, we used to do that before, yeah.
Yes. But they were staggered then. When we had the 4-year terms, they were staggered.
Hmm.
And they also were they were all at large.
Hmm.
And people were very unhappy with the at large. Historically, you need a mic. Just to refresh everyone's memory, because everyone was elected at large, one ward had the majority of the school committee members, and the community didn't feel comfortable with that. And they changed the whole scenario from 4-year staggered terms to 2-year terms, and from at large to 4 wards, 1 at large. So, Mr. Rogers, I'm offering a friendly amendment.
Before I accept that, and I don't have a problem with that, it makes sense to me as well. But before I accept it, to the solicitor, how would we decide who would be up and who wouldn't be up without being arbitrary? And if not, if you say you can't, can we be arbitrary and say Ward 1s or by lottery? Or how would you suggest? I know there are some cities and towns that have 4-year terms.
It's interesting, the way you set up a stagger usually takes like about a paragraph worth of language in order to get it right. It may be easiest that you do, well, I mean, you can set it up any way you want. You want to set an effective date, and you want to set, how is the school committee organized right now? Is it 5 members,
For one in each ward and 1 at large.
mirrors the council?
Yes,
Okay.
but 2-year terms.
So you would probably just want to identify which ward starts the 4-year term when. You could do it that the top 3 vote getters get 4-year terms out of the gate. The trick with that, the pushback to that, is I may want to run for a 4-year term, but I may not want to run for a 2-year term. I may want to run for a 2-year term, but I may not want to run for a 4-year term. So I might want to know what I'm signing up for when I put my name down.
And of course, not to interrupt you, but of course, anybody who runs for a 4-year term and doesn't like it or is not getting what they want can resign the 2-year term. And this, by the way, would save money as well. Not a ton of money, but it would save some money by having the election coincide with other elections. I have no problem accepting that friendly change. If part of that is to refer to the law department for some verbiage, maybe 1 or 2, or here's how it works, is that appropriate, Mr. Solicitor?
That's fine. What I can do is put together a couple different options on how the stagger would work. And we can choose between them. It'll be a lot easier for us to make a decision about that with language in front of us anyway.
So I would accept that as a friendly amendment. And did the city clerk understand the new motion? And we need the, well, you.
Okay, now, the motion has been, a friendly amendment has been moved, a motion has been made to make a friendly amendment. I need a second.
I'll second.
Second. Any further discussion?
Exactly what, 4-year terms, right? But staggering, okay?
Yes.
Because before you had the school committee, there were 4-year terms, but they were, the whole city, yeah, you had at large, okay? And you believe that it's.
We're not amending representation.
Yeah.
We're just amending terms.
Oh, I understand.
Okay.
What I'm saying, you believe, the superintendent, the school department, you believe that it's important for them to stagger it, because to me, it creates a problem. 5 of us are running, okay? And I support that, don't get me wrong. And I understand you can put the language, but the fact of the matter is, I may still, run for school committee, but I'm not gonna get the 4 years, so, you're still gonna upset some.
After the first election, it's all moot.
Huh?
After the first election, it's a moot issue because then it's all for us.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's only for that
It's
one
just the
time.
first election. Yeah. And that's where you gotta come up with language, is that the 3 vote getters, the 3 with the most votes, yeah. I support that.
No, that was my question.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. Madam Secretary, could you take the roll, please?
Mr. Farrier,
Yes.
Mr. Lewis,
Aye.
Ms. Perry votes aye. Mr. Rogers,
I.
Silva,
Aye.
Mr. Sewell,
I.
Mr. Tavares,
All right,
Mr. Vinatiero,
Aye.
motion passes.
Mr. Solicitor, I don't know if we need to make an amendment to the charter or not, but 10-3, school committee powers and duties. It says a school committee shall elect a chairperson and a clerk from its membership and shall adopt its own rules and order of business. They also have a vice chair. Does that need to be reflected in the charter? It does not. So there's no need to make an amendment then.
Correct. The general principle is language is usually enabling and not limiting. So the lack of language saying something like there is no vice chair, there's no language to that effect, does not prohibit a vice chair from being appointed.
Well, the chair is open to any discussion regarding school committee.
If I may go back through the chair, we're sure now that that has been referred to the law department, the way the motion was made, for recommendations or advice or information on how it's done. So that doesn't have to be added to the motion because I really didn't hear. All right, if I may, through the chair. This is a little controversial and a little political on my part, but I'm the chairman of the Democratic Party, so I'm going to say this. Back in the day, John Farrier, remember, back in the day, the school committee's clerk was from the administration. being in politics all my life and knowing politics, now their clerk comes from among the membership. Reality of it is a clerk, when calling the meeting, when suggesting, here's where we go, with just verbal attitude sometimes, can set the direction of where the vote is going to go, if everybody's following me. How did that come about, and is it possible for us to go back and suggest, or to put, not suggest, we would put it in the charter, or ask that it be done as a charter amendment, for the clerk of the school committee to be from the school administration? Do we have that right, Mr. Solicitor?
It's an interesting question. Identifying a clerk from their membership. I don't see the definition of what a clerk can and cannot do, or what the clerk has the power to do. I would suggest that they may be able to, they also have the power to set its own rules and order of business. So they could write their own rules that say a member of the administration shall perform the meeting, shall call the question, and you could write rules to that effect. The clerk wouldn't preempt that. I would just see the identification of a clerk as sort of like the identification of a vice chair, of a president pro tem, whatever the board may want to do.
So you think they should probably set it themselves, and maybe on a one-on-one basis, or I could suggest to them that that worked out quite well back in the day. And I don't know how it was legislated. I don't know how it got in there, but it always was. Do you remember, Manny? It always was somebody from the school administration that was the clerk that read the calls and the motion.
I didn't realize that it changed. They,
I don't think it's, but it's from the school.
But,
I think that's changed.
Sharon is the clerk. She's the school committee's clerk. Sharon Corsi is,
So it went back.
oh,
It went back, so maybe I'm talking
Yeah.
about something that I haven't watched.
oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
the clerk from the administration would
Yeah.
read next
The-
order of business, just like Dr.
Right.
Williams doing today, and the clerk. It's not amended.
The superintendent's secretary wears two hats. During working hours, she's the secretary for the superintendent of schools. But during school committee meetings, she's the secretary for the school committee.
If I may,
Mr. Chairman?
if I might, just one. Ms. Perry's looking at me and saying, when did, remember Joan Kent?
Oh, yes.
Joan Kent was the clerk of the school committee. She was not on the school committee.
Exactly.
And she did the reading.
That's
of
a,
the-
that's a ceremonial.
Right, but she did the reading of.
I'm sorry, I thought that they did have calls and whatnot.
Now,
But she calls the roll, okay? But keeping of the minutes,
You never know.
posting the agenda, that's all done by today's Joan Kent, who is Sharon Corsi. Yeah, that's her responsibility.
So,
I think ceremonially to, next docketed item type situation, yes, the ceremonial clerk reads that. Yes.
you've helped, everybody's helped, and the solicitor pretty much said, they can do their own rules, so even if it's in the charter, they can probably change. Thank you.
Any other discussions, questions?
No.
Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to the next article. And I will vacate the chair.
Vice Chair, stay on, give him a break, you know what I'm saying? If you're moving along okay.
we're on Article 11, election procedure. Most of this language is going to have to get cleaned up because of the vote for partisan. My only question is, and I had asked this to the solicitor, but maybe there's someone here with some institutional knowledge, because I can't find it anywhere. Does anyone know if there's a reason when candidates for the city, not the General Assembly, when they have nomination papers, that they have to turn them in all at once? And once you turn in the signatures, that's it? Like if it's 50 signatures and you turn them in and it's validated at 49, you don't have a chance to go get more? For General Assembly, you can, as you go, you get a sheet of paper, you have 20 signatures, you can turn that in and then keep going and going. But for the city, for some reason, you have to hand it in all at once. And I, for the life of me, cannot find that anywhere in writing.
Through the chair. I think, Mark, and I'm not 100% sure, they all were like that back in the day, and I think they changed it by the General Assembly change. Maybe it wasn't the General Assembly, whoever changed it for rep, senator, and so forth, and they never changed it for the city council. I think that's the only reason. I think it was always done that way, and the solicitor could comment, he may know. It was always done that way, and it either was an oversight or they said, let's just leave it the way it is. But before, everybody had to turn them in all at once. Am I correct, Mrs. Solicitor?
I'm assuming you are correct, but that's an explanation that makes sense to me, given the current fact pattern and operations. That explanation would lead to, basically inadvertently lead to the current practice, which may not actually be required by any law.
John Ferry, does that sound right to you? Yeah.
Because I don't see the point of it that you have to guess in advance how many signatures you have. Not that it's particularly hard or to get, if you're running for a ward, to get 50 signatures. But if you're running at large, it's whatever it is, 200. That's validated signatures. So you know whoever it is going to get 300, 400, because you know you're going to get a good chunk of those that are going to be invalidated. But you don't know until it's already turned in and they go through the list. And then that leads to that strange East Providence tradition of trying to see who can get the most signatures. And you have some candidates, I won't say who, that turn in 600, 800 signatures. And you have the canvassing office, they still have to go through each name and they have to validate the signatures, and that takes time. And then they come in on the weekends and they're going through that list, and the taxpayers are paying them overtime while they're doing that. So I think it would be more efficient if we could do what they do with the state, where you could just turn in the pieces of paper as you go. And once you get the actual required number of validated signatures, they can stop counting. And if there is some sort of challenge, then they can go through the rest of the signatures, see if that's a reason to keep counting. But otherwise, I think that would save headaches for the candidates, and it would also save the city a little bit of time and money. So I don't know if it's worth putting in language in the charter for that, or how to even phrase that.
It would be preempted by state law anyway. Because if there was a change by state law, then we'd be in conflict. That those particular powers are reserved for the General Assembly underneath our home rule charter within the Rhode Island Constitution. Your point's well taken. We can ask why that practice is in place, but I don't think you need to put anything in the charter to deal with it.
Consistent with the state law.
Yeah, so it's also cited within, let's see, 11-1 talks about Article 8 of the Rhode Island Constitution and how municipalities are actually pretty limited in what you can do in terms of impacting elections. Election processes and procedures like that.
Mr. Chairman, I think a lot of it resorts back to Title 17 too, with the charter. I mean, the state law. There's canvassing in Title 17 has a lot of that, and that's when it gets dicey. When you're reading that law, there's interpretation that can go either way, and a lot of times it usually falls on the canvassing authority. They can almost override it anyway. But your point is well taken, and it does make a lot of sense what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm just curious, and again, I'm not saying I'm demanding it would be in the charter. This probably isn't the right forum for it. It could be a special exemption carved out in state law. It could just be something that the canvassing authority has to decide on in a meeting. I just think that is a deficiency that the city has for elections that can be easily remedied. We just need to figure out where it is. But yeah, point taken. It doesn't need to be added into the charter.
Through the chair, Mrs. Solicitor, would the Board of Elections have any authority over that? Or
Board of Elections, I expect would. The local canvassing board, it's kind of it's always difficult to like disprove a negative, right? We're abiding by a law that we can't find. So
I'm just thinking of the recent controversy over signatures.
that's what I
And
was
that
thinking
seemed to
about
go
too.
right to the Board of Elections.
Yeah,
Uh,
and it is a good reason why you should keep collecting and submitting as you go.
That's a good point. I mean, hypothetically, I'm not endorsing this idea because some of us on here did have to go out and get signatures. If we wanted to experiment with that, go turn it in piece by piece, and then if it got rejected, go challenge that, it would go right to the Board of Elections. So if anyone has some free time in the next election and they decide they want to go test that theory, feel free.
Through the chair, to your point though, I find it problematic when somebody is trying to get 600, 700, 800 signatures and creating more work, at the taxpayer's expense. No, obviously this doesn't appear a way to deter that, but I do agree with that.
So, but as far as I'm concerned, for the rest of, and for that, section 11, that just needs, the solicitor needs to patch up the language because most of that, or at least half of it, needs to get switched because of the vote that we had for partisan. So unless there's anyone that has any,
Mr. Chairman. Section 1114, terms of office. All elected and appointed officers elected or appointed for a definite term shall enter upon their term of office upon the first Tuesday after the first Monday in December. I believe we changed that to January, so that needs to change.
Dylan, you have that, right? And you're noted somewhere? Sure. In the big binder.
Mr. Chair. Question, who determines the amount of signatures needed for each candidate? Who makes that determination? The Board of Elections or?
That I know is in state law, but there is you can have an exception for cities by a special exception. But
Who determines how many signatures you need to be qualified?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Through the chair. Yeah, just one statement on that, Dylan. It's changed, what changed also from way back when was that you can sign for multiple candidates. Now, that's from the top all the way down to the bottom. So there must be somewhere where you can refer to that law and take it down to the city level, or if it's passed for federal level, it transfers all the way down to the very lowest candidate. So I think that needs some research on what, and I agree with him. I think it's ridiculous, you know. I think it needs some kind of research. We need some kind of answer on exactly if they change Congress and U.S. Senate, does that transfer all the way down to the cities and towns into their local elections, or does the canvassing authority grab that and say, oh, here's what they did. We think it's a good idea that you can sign for multiple candidates. And that does make it a little less too much when they're checking signatures. If they do, and that's if they have them first, because they put them in order. If they take the one with the most signatures, they can refer back to it and say, sign Mark's papers and sign the mayor's papers, and they signed, because that's a good signature. And if they refer to it, so it goes a little bit faster than it seems. They do check all 800 signatures, but when it gets to you or me or whoever runs in a ward, and we only need 50, they can compare it to them. And they also go back. So when they get to the 50, if you turned in 80, they push it aside and go to the next person. Then they go back and they infer, and they tell you that, okay, you did get 75 out of your 80, but initially, let's give him, make sure he has his 50, make sure she has her 50, make sure this one. Just to let you know. And that may be the decision of the canvassing authority. I don't know that that's. The other thing is, if I might, through the chair again, I guess this is for the solicitor or for the chair, maybe to ask the solicitor. On, you know, when we get to 11.4, 11.5, 11.6, it looks like since we've decided to recommend that the change be made to partisan government, that this is almost verbiage. It's almost wording, because I think the wording would have to be changed on almost all of them to say that now you have an election, 2 elections actually, for each position if you're a partisan government. You have a Democratic primary and you have a Republican primary. So is it, the question I'm asking, should it almost be a blanket motion, seeing we voted on that and it was, I think it was unanimous, but no, it wasn't unanimous, but the majority ruled. Should we just refer these few articles to the law department and say, make it work for primaries for partisan election?
I understand that to be the effectuation of the earlier motion, but language won't be complete until it's presented to you and then you can review it. And it's also just genuinely very helpful to have additional eyes on language like that, because it's complicated language and the more people that look at it will be helpful. So I don't have set language yet, but I do have a set task that I need to do for the commission.
Again, through the chair, do you need a motion for that to send?
I've got
You
it.
think it's automatically?
I've got it.
Yeah, I think the motions that we did for partisan were all encompassing, really, so. I'd rather give Dylan a broader slate to work with, so. Anything left in 11?
Through the chair. If I can get a clarification from the solicitor, under recall. Recall is authorized in the case of mayor, council member, or school committee member who has been indicted or informed against or a felony conviction of misdemeanor, blah, so on and so forth. Is that a recall provision or is it not a recall provision? Does this give the right to recall a mayor, a council member, a school committee member, or does it just give a recall in the cases that they mention? In the examples that they give?
So it's an authorization. So there is an implicit limitation that if one of those things has not occurred, then recall is not authorized. And even if one of those things occurred, recall is not authorized within the last 9 months of an individual's term. So you cannot just recall someone because they've made a politically unpopular decision. They would not be eligible for recall in that scenario.
I'm not sure you answered my question. It might be me that's not asking right. So is this not a recall provision? Because can you in other cities say, I don't like what he or she wore to the council meeting, let's recall them? Or we don't like the votes that they've been taking, they're not popular with the people, we want to recall?
You can do that.
You can do that in other cities and towns?
Yeah, the threshold is a minimum amount of signatures, not conviction of a crime and then a minimum amount of signatures.
Conviction of a crime is that's state law, period, right?
I'm not sure. Ineligibility to run and removal from office are also very different.
And through the chair, if I might. Mr. Solicitor, does this prohibit, it's in the charter, does this prohibit someone from going around getting signatures and saying, this is the reason we want to remove said person? Do they not have the right, the way this charter is written up, to do that with the number of signatures?
They
For
could,
any reason?
they could do it, but it would not be effectuated. It wouldn't actually trigger the recall procedure.
Okay. Gotcha.
Out of curiosity, do you happen to know what the average recall provision is? I know there are certain places like Woonsocket that are it's a little bit easier to get rid of somebody than other communities where on one end, they're on the other. What the average is?
I don't off the top of my head. I do remember the previous commission spending a good amount of time on this because there was a concern with both the mayor and the 4-year term that the recall provision needed to be done well. So I don't, I'll put it this way. We did do that level of research whenever that was, like 4 or 5 years ago.
We didn't agree with that, the recall provision.
It was still contentious at that point in time? Okay, then I take back what I was going to say. We did a lot of work, but we did not come to a consensus, so.
I guess I'm also just curious because I didn't really think about it. Usually what the minimum threshold of signatures is. You know, is it 3%? Is it 10%? 20%?
I think another provision I've worked on was
If you're mayor.
5%, but I can't speak confidently right now.
I'm not advocating for one. I'm just curious.
As a general rule of thumb, recall is just really, really hard to do because the general population, it doesn't follow politics at the extent that the people that are interested in politics follow it. So recall is generally generated from someone within the realm that's really focused on politics. in order to meet the threshold to get to these percentages, the general public needs to become interested in recall. It's just very rare. I mean, you're on the news for committing a crime is sort of the, okay, now we've got everyone's attention, not just the people that follow politics year round.
Through the chair.
But through the chair,
Oh, I'm sorry. I just have a quick clarification. I was wondering maybe if this city solicitor, I want to make sure I'm reading this last line of the article that we're reading. So this basically states that no ordinance can be put forth as long as it can't be put forth going against what this says. Am I reading that correctly, or is there a possibility?
The council can pass an ordinance that further refines this process so long as it doesn't conflict with anything in this language.
Okay, so as long as it doesn't conflict, but it can add to it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
through the chair again. Mr. Solicitor, how was, or what did they use to call for a recall of Woonsocket against the mayor? Wasn't that minor? Wasn't it personality or?
I think it was just the council drew up a cause of recall that was almost based on like interactions with the council and staff members or something to that effect. There was no allegation that a crime had been committed.
So you can't do that with this charter?
You could not do that in East Providence.
Okay.
So clarification, so that means that that's the exception to an ordinance, right? An ordinance couldn't be put forth to do just what happened in
Right.
Socket.
Right. You could not pass an ordinance that lowered the bar for recall. You could refine the recall procedure, but it can't.
So it's more procedure that can
Yeah.
be changed.
That's the way I would.
So
read that,
basically,
probably.
this is the structure of the law. Okay,
Mhm.
that's all I wanted, because we don't want.
Chairman, we move on?
I was looking at you, John. It was usually has some closing words of wisdom before the next article. So next is wards. Are we fine with 4 wards?
Again, you know me, devil's advocate. I just want to get this straight so we don't have to do this again. Ward, again, for the solicitor, the ward arrangement, as far as I know, and how can I ask this question? You cannot split certain rep districts or, so in other words, it has to coincide with state law? No, ward can be, it can overlap districts that
Yes.
the state has changed and so?
Yes.
Okay. Can't cut through the precinct. All right. Okay, just that was, I want to make sure.
Yep. General provisions. Publication of rules and regulations, membership of boards, commissions.
Through the chair?
Mhm.
Didn't we change printing and publication, or did we just have a discussion on that? Didn't
That
we
was something
recommend, right?
We were going to wait for a recommendation from Dylan
Oh, so we're still waiting.
on ordinances.
Okay.
Yes, I have directive on how ordinances should be reorganized, and I'm going to take the Open Meetings Act. I'm going to work it backwards from the Open Meetings Act, and I'm going to make sure that the advertisement requirements aren't unnecessarily burdensome.
So 13-1 will come up again when you're finished.
Most likely.
Okay.
I don't think necessarily that, because one, it's a may and not a shall. So it's at the discretion of the council, and that's afterwards. I think that's just for it to be made publicly available. So I would actually like this one to be enforced more. If someone goes into City Hall and asks for a copy of the charter, that we could have actual printed versions of the charter available for people. But
I think they just print the
it just printed it.
Unicode. Yeah.
That's what I have.
Yeah.
Um, Again, a lot of it is ethics for employees. Supremacy of state law. Revision and codification of ordinances, that is being revised right now, right, Dylan? I think you said
I'm sorry, I was reading 13.3. What's that?
that you're working on actually revising the ordinances to get them in line
Yes.
with the charter.
Yes. We just did a pretty large amount of work on making the, anything that conflicted with the previous charter change. But whether or not it's the whole code of ordinances, it's not. We haven't done that level of review. And quite frankly, without those jobs are generally hired out to specialists because it's a truly wild amount of work to cross-check an entire charter versus an entire code of ordinances. It's very difficult. Reading 13.3, I may want to present some research to this committee because I'm not sure. How do you know like what someone's political party is? Am I officially a member of a party or not a member of a party?
I know that we voted for partisan, but I'm also not sure if the city council doesn't approve partisan, or if they do and the voters don't approve partisan. I'm not really sure how we as a nonpartisan city should be taking into account political affiliations on our boards and commissions. That's a double standard.
I mean, I have no way of knowing the political affiliation of every member of the planning board, the zoning board, the list goes on. So I may want to.
I would also say that demographically, seeing as we have a majority of the city that is affiliated with one particular political party, that you're going to find it hard to
You may be
fill
artificially
vacancies.
limiting population in a problematic way. You might. Yep. But I don't even know that you can do that. It's important for issues related to party, which is a portion of canvassing, I believe. And I believe that's a statewide requirement. But I also, I don't know that there's a way that I can meaningfully check the political party affiliation of every single person that serves on a board in the city. I don't know that there's a way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm fine striking that, but if you want to look into it, however you want to.
I'll double check. You don't even need to be a registered voter in order to be a member of boards, so.
Through the chair. To the solicitor, a couple of questions. 13-5, persons in employ of the city not to hold elective office. That is within the city, is that not correct? Can city employees hold state office and can state employees hold city offices? They can. And where does that show up? In state law?
There's no prohibition anywhere.
Okay.
There is a lot of state law revolving around, you can keep, so if a member of the General Assembly was a contractor that used to very regularly receive state contracts, they can run for office, be elected to the General Assembly, and then they can continue to get those same contracts. But they can't all of a sudden, like, if their amount of state contracts doubled, that's an ethics violation. So there's a lot of language around what sort of income you were deriving from a subsidiary of that elected office at the time you ran for that office versus what you receive after you're in that office.
Okay. And the second question is, that doesn't show up here, but I think it came up in my past political activities. There are some boards that once they announce for office, they have to leave the board. And what comes to mind is zoning and possibly personnel. Does that make sense to you? Do you know if that is anywhere written?
I'm not aware of that. I do know that that is a common request, or at least that they suspend their position on a board while they're running for office. I'm not aware off the top of my head of something that forces that to occur. You probably could force that to occur. I think that's very different from like preventing someone to make a political donation versus having someone give up a seat that they're volunteering on so that they can run for office. The difference is you're not limiting their political speech, you're limiting sort of like a volunteer activity. But I'm not aware of something that forces it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman? 13-4, reserved. What's it reserved for?
So reserved is something that we use in legislation where maybe something used to be there and it's been struck, or you just want to hold a place in case new language will be introduced later on. You don't necessarily renumber everything if you strike something.
Okay, so you don't have to renumber everything, which makes sense. Okay. There was something probably there at some point.
The cause for that is that there's probably something like in the Code of Ordinances or somewhere else in the charter that refers to section 13-7, right? And then if you renumbered it because you struck 13-6, then it's gobbledygook. For an example, I would refer you to the Cranston zoning code. I cannot for the life of me figure it out because it refers to two different sets of numbers.
That makes sense. I was
Yeah.
wondering.
Are we good with section 13? Okay. Moving on to courts. Probate court. I think that is pretty clear cut. Same with municipal court. Any issue? Okay. Well. You got something, Manny? Oh. Yeah, mayor nominates, council approves.
See no problem with reports. Fine.
Oh, are we good with the courts?
Don't see any problem with the courts.
I don't see any other sections of the charter. Right, Dylan, so I'm gonna leave it in your capable hands.
I
So,
would make a motion to adjourn.
also, just to clarify, so for our October and November meetings, they'll be still posted. We just won't be meeting, and hopefully by December, we'll have something to look at, Dylan. Maybe.
My confidence level is much higher about December than it is about October.
Something against Christmas?
I've made promises. That this will be done before January.
I was gonna say it's a nice Christmas present. It was just a bunch of line items to vote on.
Yes, yes.
All right, so I will accept a motion to adjourn. Okay, second,
Second.
all in favor?
Uh,
Aye.
Any opposed?